Welcome back, everybody. This is Rodrigo Afanador with another episode of Asheville Real Estate News. Really excited to talk about something that, if you've been in real estate long enough, you've been in a situation where you've been frustrated with the person on the other side of the transaction, whether it's buying, selling a house, renting a house, being a tenant, being a landlord, whatever the case may be. So today, we're going to go in detail and talk about conflict resolution. Very excited to welcome a dear friend and conflict, expert? Mediator, consultant, a million different titles. But it'd be impossible for me to do a good job of explaining what you do. So Robin, welcome to the show. Why don't you give everybody a quick rundown on what you do and maybe how you got here?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me here. I am a consultant mostly, and I have been a mediator for 10 years. I guess going on 11 years now. I was a community mediator. I was a youth mediator. I worked in schools. I worked with the court system for many years. And then about 4 years ago, I started my own business doing more business-related facilitation of team dynamics conversations and coaching and things of that sort that mediation really laid the groundwork for as far as my skill set. I don't really like the term expert. I like the focus area because I'm really focused on conflict resolution as my passion.
Just curious, what's wrong with the term expert or the wording of it?
Well, I have a couple things. One is that I think that people can become really focused on something and then be better at it than people with lots and lots of letters behind their name. And my dad's joke is that if you're an expert, then he thinks about like when it's a spurt of water. Okay. You're no longer
it can be short-lived.
Yeah. So you're an or you're a dried up has-been drip or something like that if you're an expert.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I guess if that's what you're thinking of expert, that's not very appealing.
Yeah, it's really just bad dad humor.
Fair enough. So your focus really is just resolving conflict, and I guess it'd be really cool to hear what that definition is of, like, how do you know when conflict's been resolved?
Ooh, how do you know when conflict has been resolved? When all the people involved in the conflict agree that it's been resolved. That's when.
So, I mean, I guess that would just leave a lot of situations when more often than not, then conflict isn't resolved then, right?
Yeah, well, I think conflict is a constant, just like change. Conflict is a driver of change. It's a catalyst for change. And so generally when one piece of conflict that we have entered into is resolved in that we both feel good about the direction that we're heading from this agreement that we've made, then new conflicts arise because we might have a difference of opinion, different values, limited resources, things like that cause conflict.
I guess, yeah, if you think of, like, if you get to a point where you have a mediator involved, you're probably not both agreeing that it's over or not necessarily wanting it to be over. It's just like, well, I'm tired.
What do you mean over?
Well, right? You like said both of people. No, just in general, the conflict's over, right? Like, I think that at least some of the times in my experience, probably more often than not, like in the business world, it's just more often than not. If there is a conflict, the moving over isn't just because you feel like it's resolved. It just sometimes makes more business sense to move on and not dwell on something that's like, no, I still think that person was wrong or whatever, but it's not worth the time or energy to like prove that I'm right or get into it, et cetera.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is sort of a passive response to conflict in that it's not worth my time. It's not a big enough deal. I don't really want to deal with it because
it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter, right? And the question that I always ask to that is, does it really matter and you just don't feel like handling it? Or is it really that it doesn't matter and therefore it's not really a conflict because it's not interfering with your daily life, right? So when people call in a mediator, they call in a mediator because it's interfering with something that they want.
Right. Fair enough. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. This is a real estate podcast, so a lot of things have to do with houses and money, which are both things that elicit a lot of emotion. So my first house that I bought, just to give you context, is I bought with a partner, and we had a little bit of a falling out halfway through. The partner basically wanted to default on the loan because he felt like the deal was no good and was like wanting to walk away. And that was like my first experience of conflict where I was like, what are you talking about? Like, the money is like, my name is behind this. We lined this up. We can't just like walk away. And dealing through that, I guess that was one of the examples I was thinking. I was like, never really felt resolved around it, but very quickly it didn't put a lot of energy into like rectifying things with that. So what would the active approach to conflict resolution, I guess, in that situation be?
Yeah. So
versus being passive, which I don't know, maybe it's not bad to be passive though.
No, it's a super good example. So I always take it back to what I consider the roots of conflict. And there's sort of three main boxes that roots for me fall into.
Okay.
Limited resources is one, unmet needs is one, and different values is one. So in this short example that you just gave me, I hear different values and limited resources right off the bat, right? Limited resource, when we think of resources, time, money, property, right? When we think of values, it's our beliefs, it's our priorities, it's our principles, the rules that we live by because of our beliefs, and it's our motivators to live up to those things.
Right.
And conflict lives in the descriptors of those things. So limited resources. Limited is where conflict lives, not plentiful
not
resources.
Abundance of, yes.
Right? Like plentiful resources, not a whole lot of conflict.
Right.
Same values, not a whole lot of conflict. Different values, this is when we come into conflict a lot. So it sounds like in this example, you realize that you and this partner had very different values about image, about reputation, about what that meant for you as a person and what people thought about you, and also about the resources that it affected. And then as far as defaulting on the loan, I mean, money is a pretty easy resource to point out when it comes to conflict. So not resolved to me in this case is maybe you resolved to part ways, and it sounds like lost the relationship. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah. So a loss of a relationship could feel like resolution, and in your value set, that's the question I would have is like, is it in your value set to be able to lose relationships over bad business deals?
Good questions. Fair enough. Awesome. So you mentioned that like these three pillars, right? So what were they again, just to recap, because I found that.
Yeah, and I have a diagram if you want to put it up on the show notes if you want. But limited resources, unmet needs, and different values.
So let's say I find myself in a situation like that down the road. For whatever reason, there's some conflict with somebody.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a tenant, business partner, somebody I'm buying, selling something from, et cetera. How do I approach the situation so we can, hopefully diffuse it and everybody gets a little bit of what they want, I guess?
Well, so I like to approach conflict from a place of how can I get into my logic brain, first of all. And when I'm in my logic brain is when I can identify the roots that we just mentioned. And it doesn't mean stifle the emotions. It means name and tame them. They say like name it to tame it, right?
Oh, okay. I yes, they do apparently.
I guess they do. I don't know who the first person to say it was. I wish I could quote them. So name the emotion that's going on for both for you and for the other person, and be clear about what that emotion is or what those emotions are, and put them on the table so that there's transparency about that's the emotion that's driving. The reason
I'm feeling frustrated is, or no, I'm angry with you.
Not even
I
because,
don't even know.
Just like right now, I'm feeling frustrated.
I'm struggling to talk to you because I'm frustrated with you. Okay.
And so maybe you need some time, right? There's a great philosopher from the early 1900s, Rollo May, says, true freedom lies in your ability to pause between a stimulus and a response. And in that response, choose.
Okay.
So stimulus, I get some sort of emotion. And then response is I name to tame that emotion. And then we can get into our logic brain a little bit, because generally that fight, flight, or freeze thing that is created by our emotional responses, our logic brain doesn't work at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
So question on this, though. It seems like a little, idealistic. Because what if somebody doesn't have the ability to tame him? What do you do then if it's kind of a one-sided thing? Because I think that probably more often than not, that's where people find themselves in, where there is conflict, and one of them is like, hey, like, I'm really trying to work through this. Like, I've got intention. I'm working in good faith. And the other party's like, I'm just angry, like, whatever, you know? So what do you do when it's one-sided?
You ask them what they need. You know, it seems like you're really angry in this moment. What do you need so we can get to a place of logic, right? It seems like you're really frustrated with the situation, and I want to be able to talk to you when my emotions are high right now, your emotions are high right now. What do we need to do to get to a place where we can talk about this? So
you're always trying to bring it back to, hey, like, what do we need to do so that you can have this conversation without emotion?
Not without emotion, just with emotion named and tamed, right?
Named emotion.
Yeah. So named, generally, if I admit that I'm angry, I am no longer driven by anger. The anger, I think Brene Brown says, like, it's kind of BS to say that nobody knows what they're feeling, right? If you don't tune into your own vulnerability, then your vulnerability will drive you.
Fair enough.
So if you aren't willing to say the thing and be vulnerable enough to name yours, and then they call it kind of priming. There's a great course, if people are out there in the business world that wants to take crucial conversations, they talk about being able to prime a conversation by saying, like, I'm guessing at what's going on for you because you're not giving me anything in this moment. So I'm going to start guessing at what's going on for you, because people, the thing that people hate the worst is being misunderstood and me labeling you in a way you don't want to be labeled. So if I do that and I get it wrong, then you're going to make sure I get it right.
Right.
And then I get to be corrected, and I get to stand corrected, and I get to give you the opportunity to say that is what your emotion is. And it's pretty incredible how that can just tame a situation. But I think 9 times out of 10, we're not, like, the very first step is get out of just emotions driving, bring in logic, bring in empathy. So
how do you do that when sometimes you're not talking to somebody face to face, or there's a lot of, via text or email or, whatever the case may be, or sometimes you're talking through a third party, right? So if you're buying or selling on the MLS, there's a real estate agent involved.
I think you can know by what's happening for yourself in your own body, in your own mind, in your own emotions, that something is heightening, right? You know that the situation is getting harder and harder, the communication's getting worse and worse. So that's the time for you to call a pause and say, we need to be face to face. We can Zoom, right? Technology is great. Like, we can see each other, or at least we can hear each other and talk on the phone, right? But email and text and things like that, you're not going to get a full-on resolution from that.
So I'm running into 2 problems. I either feel like I'm being very naive, or maybe I'm just, like, doing a terrible job at this in the first place to begin with, and I'm not sure which one it is. I just feel like sometimes when we've run into conflicts, I don't know how realistic it would be to get somebody to actually want to engage, like, be like, hey, let's take a step back, or hey, like, let's FaceTime or take a Zoom meeting or whatever the case may be to, like, try to name these emotions. Is that, like, always I guess it just seems like there's got to be some sort of level of commitment from both people, and if you don't have it on the other side, then what do you do? That's, like, I'm sure you've run into that, right? You've been doing this 10 plus years. There's got to be times where you run into these situations where somebody's just not willing to dig deep to, like, get to a point.
Well, I think 2 things. One, sometimes there's people who aren't willing to dig, and you do your best. And sometimes just doing your best and not actually hearing from them still has shifted something, because you've guessed at emotions, you've tried to see a logical next step. A lot of people, especially in business land and deals land and numbers land, like, they don't want to say, I feel angry. They want to say, what are we going to do to fix it? Right? And
I like saying that.
Yeah, I know. And so, I mean, we all do, right? Like, it feels good to fix something. And the reality is that we don't come to full resolution, and greater self-awareness is sort of the ultimate goal of a lot of these things, if you haven't taken time to see all the factors at play. Depending on any study, you can say it's either somewhere between 55 and 96% of our language is nonverbal.
Yeah.
Right? And that's in our tone, that's in our volume, that's in our body language, it's in all of it. And so a lot of the time the tendency in business is to say, no, he said this, therefore that's all we have to go on. And when you're able to talk about the things that are not said is when you
What's
get
being communicated.
All of the things that are being communicated, then you have a better picture of it all. So the naming it to taming it is like the very first step. It's just how do you get into logic brain? Logic brain, we all love logic brain.
I think there might be some people who disagree with that. I mean, I like logic brain. That's definitely where I feel the most comfortable, in most areas. I was like, oh, let's just break this down and we'll build it back up or whatnot. But
logic brain doesn't work fully if you have an emotional monster tugging at it, right? Or if logic brain is surrounded by a bubble of heated emotion, because you're not thinking full on, right? The three things are emotion, logic, and empathy.
Yeah.
Empathy as in, do I understand what's going on for the other person?
No, that's awesome. Well, question here for you. So you've been doing this for 10 years. You must like conflict.
I do.
Yeah. What is it about it that's kept you in a field that I'm sure some people would get burned out on pretty easily? So it's like the makeup's not for everybody, right? So like, what about it do you enjoy? Like, what do you keep coming back to? Like, why do you lean into it?
I lean in because I've found that the more often I lean in, the greater growth I see in others, I see in myself. I think in the entrepreneur world, they say, right, like being uncomfortable is the best place to be because you're growing. And so conflict is a catalyst for change. And if you're not being proactive in the change that conflict creates, then you are probably going to get pummeled by it. If you're proactive in a conflict resolution situation, then you're probably going to own it. And that's a great thing.
Yeah. What do you say to somebody who is conflict adverse and tries to pacify people or rolls over too often or just avoid situations where there might be disagreements, et cetera?
I generally ask, what are the pros and cons of that approach? And a lot of the time the cons are I get walked on and I don't like it. And so then I ask how they can take short, small steps to be more of a self-advocate. How can they get what they want versus only giving up what they want? The way that I understand passive, aggressive, and assertive, passive is I'm going to put your needs ahead of mine. Aggressive is I'm going to put my needs ahead of yours. And assertive is I'm going to try and meet everybody's needs. And
I like that.
Yeah. I like it too, and it helps with taking away tone policing people and, saying that just because I'm yelling means you're aggressive. Because sometimes I could be yelling and also very intent on getting your needs met as well.
I'm not yelling. I'm just loud.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
What is, seems to me that part of this that'd be important is learning how to say yes and no in a very strong but non-combative way.
Yeah.
So are there any tips and tricks that you have for somebody who struggles to either committing or, saying no? Like I know some people they drag out no's for a long time. Maybe, I don't know. Just say no. You know from the beginning you don't want to do it, say no.
Yeah. How do you set boundaries? It sounds like is the question you're asking.
Yeah, I guess that probably, it's the same thing, right? I think if you got good boundaries, you're going to avoid certain moments of conflict because you just don't get to that place.
Yeah. My life is pretty low drama these days because I don't. I think I'm pretty clear.
So how do you set boundaries? How do you start setting that as a standard for yourself so that other people learn to respect it?
I think that it starts with rapport, and I can say no to anybody as long as I know that they feel respected by me. If I have done a good job of building rapport with someone, then I can tell them the hardest piece of feedback that there is to tell, because they know that I'm doing it from a place of care for all of us. So again, it comes to I'm trying to meet both of our needs, and I've made that really clear somehow.
What's the best way to make that clear?
I think, like conflict resolution, everybody makes it really, really complicated. And to me, I like to just demystify and simplify. It's just by saying the whole story out loud, right? So I'm trying to meet your needs here, and I'm trying to meet my needs, and because of that, I have to say no, or because of that, I'm hoping you'll say yes, right? And then name the needs that you see the other person has. Name the needs that I have. Just be very clear. It's all about clarity and transparency.
Do you want to follow up on that or anything?
No, that answered my question. That was a good answer.
Yeah. I've really been intrigued by something. It just seems like a lot of what we're talking about when it comes to conflict resolution, for better or for worse, has a lot of like similarities or overlap when it comes to very like basic and in-depth sales training, right? Because a lot of that is getting people from a no to a yes. And that transition isn't like, if you're a good salesperson and you're doing a good thing and you're pushing a good product, and that no to a yes is taking somebody who should be at a yes and is at a no for reasons sometimes they don't understand. And the only way to do that is to, I guess, get on the same page with them and be like, hey, like we're in this together. We're wanting the same thing, even though we might be walking down a different path.
Yeah, it's a really common thing. And, even in business situations nowadays, people are saying, oh, I don't get along with this person. How do I work with them? And I take it back to co-parenting mediations. We've decided that we are no longer a compatible fit to be in a relationship, and we put the child as our main goal. And so, the hope is that both parents are putting the child's best interest.
Yeah, they can rally around the same cause or same outcome. Yeah.
So we all share the same objectives here. Let's focus on the objectives. Let's focus on what we all need in order to meet those objectives, and then we're there. And if people can have enough self-awareness, not even a lot, enough self-awareness to get through and understand what they need through the process and be able to ask for it, then you can come out with a really solid resolution.
Yeah. Well, Matt, this is could go on for days, as you know. It's been going on for 10 years. What's, as we're wrapping up, just any final thoughts on conflict in general, and for somebody maybe who's just starting thinking about being aware of conflict, a couple of thoughts to them, and maybe a couple of words to somebody who's hey, I have a pretty good grasp on conflict and self-aware, and I feel like I'm pretty competent, but would love to unlock a couple more levels.
Sure. So I think was that 3 different questions?
No, it was same question, but I guess targeted at 2 different audiences. For the beginner or somebody who's not super aware of what conflict resolution is in general.
Yeah.
A couple of words for them to take the next few steps, and then same thing, but for somebody who's been aware of it, been practicing it for a long time.
Yes, absolutely. So conflict resolution simply is just effective communication. Be a good communicator and you will solve conflicts. Be self-aware, you will solve conflicts. Combine them all, be accountable. It's great. If you've been doing it for a day, then keep practicing. If you've been doing it for 20 years, then keep practicing, right? Because the better we are, the better we are at communicating, the better for our world. And also, sometimes we get cocky or we get too full of ourselves that we need to come back down and be actually, this is a real basic thing to still practice every single day. It's like riding a bike or practicing a skill. You have to do it all the time to keep it.
And then just a final question here. I'm curious, what's been the biggest thing of growth that you've seen since you've been focusing on and being aware of conflict? It can be in general or personal for yourself, either one.
Yeah. To me, it is personal accountability has been the biggest thing. It's really easy to point fingers and blame other people when I'm angry, and it never works.
Yep.
So, when I can own a part of a situation, then I actually get so much more power over what to do about it.
For sure.
And so I feel just more empowered when I can take personal responsibility for how I affected the situation and how I can affect the result.
Absolutely. So somebody who wants to connect with you, work with you, hear more about you or whatnot, how do they do that? Give us the info about yourself and how to get connected with you.
Yeah, communityconflictsolutions.com
Mm-hmm.
or robinfunston.com. They'll take you to the same place, and
Okay.
all my contact info and services and things like that are on the website. You can connect to my TEDx talk there, too, if you wanted to see my face on stage.
Wish I would have known that at the beginning. That would have been a good part of the introduction.
Oh, well, it can be
Yeah.
part of the closing.
Well, there you go, guys. Another good episode here with our good friend Robin talking about conflict resolution. Renowned TEDx speaker, now that we can add on that. And guys, we'll have everything about Robin's contact information on the website linked up in the show notes, and put it into practice. And also, let us know if there's something maybe we should go back and dive into depth. Maybe Robin would come back on the show if there's specific relationships or circumstances or situations that you have found yourself in that are conflict, and we want to get some specific questions answered. So thank you all for tuning in. Hope to see you guys next Tuesday. Until then, take care.